ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons. Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And of course, we are at our third segment today, which is the ABC Dialogue.
And we have a very special guest in the studio.
Every day is a special guest.
And yeah, it's also someone that I actually look up to a lot.
And you follow on Twitter.
Yes, and it's a real pleasure to have him here today in our studio.
In conjunction with Human Rights Day, we want to highlight the state of human rights in Malaysia. And of course, the right person to talk about this is Eric Paulsen, Executive Director of Lawyers for Liberty. Hi.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me.
So, Eric Paulsen, tell us more about Lawyer for Liberty.
Well, it's a collective of lawyers, like-minded lawyers, who work on issues that interest them, public interest litigation, defending human rights defenders, and taking up issues of grave importance, particularly fundamental rights and police violence. So I think we are mostly well known for cases that touches on police violence, death in custodies, and police shooting.
Mm. But why Lawyers for Liberties? You are one of the co-founders, right?
Yes.
Back in 2011?
Yes. Yes, I'm one of co-founders together with two other persons, Latifa Koya and Surendran. Both are well-known human rights lawyers. Yeah. We have been working together off and on for many, many years. And we have been doing it quite ad hocly. And we used to meet up in coffee shops and other people's offices. And it became a bit of a... well, it's not very convenient. And then we had younger lawyers who were interested to join us. Then we thought, hey, why don't we just formalize it and make it proper so that we have a space, we have the resources to actually do this properly, and then we are able to train younger lawyers to do what we do.
So you actually, do you do like awareness campaign, or you actually do pro bono services for your clients on human rights issue? How it goes?
Mostly it's pro bono litigation on very serious human rights abuses. So if you have divorce problems, so don't come to us. We don't do that. And we also do advocacy campaigns. But mainly our work is done through actually intervening when there's something very serious happens. So like a death in custody, police shooting. Sometimes there are dissidents, members of parliament, civil society activists who gets in trouble. They get questioned by the police, they get harassed.
So you are the right person for them to come to.
Yes, and of course if Duran ASEAN gets in trouble for airing, any interviews or my interviews, then you can come to us, definitely. Pro bono.
That sounds very promising.
Yes, and thank you for that.
So Eric Paulsen, we in conjunction of Human Rights Day, especially for this month of December, if you want to just like use one word to describe the state of human rights in Malaysia, what would that be?
Can I use like
later on?
Three or four words?
Okay, yeah, 3 or 4 words.
It's 2 steps. One step forward and 2 steps backwards. So that's how I would generally describe human rights in Malaysia every year.
That was 6 words, by the way.
You really counted on that.
I'm a lawyer, I can't count. So.
Okay. Why Malaysia's state of human rights is getting worse and worse, if that's what you meant?
Well, in general, I don't think Malaysia is such a horrible country.
We are not to the state of Afghanistan and all that.
Yes, we are not in the state of Myanmar, for example, or Pakistan, for example. Generally, I think by and large, our government, they have been moving the right direction. But I think there's a kind of, paralysis because they have been in power for so many years. There are state structures, the police, the Aegis chambers. All of them are, they have been working together with the government. When it should not be the way, because these are supposed to be independent state institutions. So what happened is when there are more progressive measures, modern standards that all modern governments should aspire to. So Malaysia wants to do it, but they don't want to do it fully. So they will have half-hearted measures. So, so I can give a very good example. Despite the very good work that's been done by the Prime Minister to abolish the Internal Security Act, which everybody admits is a wonderful move. And then it also abolished the emergency ordinance. But then
these are remnants from our colonial times,
correct.
and also during the time of
Mahathir, yes, because it was used the most. So these measures are, we all know that detention without trial is no longer acceptable. So it might have been acceptable, during the emergency, etc. But certainly in no modern, respectable nation would want to have detention without trial. And I think he has done very well to abolish it. But nonetheless, because of pressures from the police, pressure from the Home Minister, they have revived detention without trial through the Prevention of Crime Act, and then you have SOSMA, the Securities Offences Special Measures Act, which have some provisions which are quite draconian in terms of fair trial. So these are measures which in light of modern day demands. Shouldn't be in Malaysia because you don't get such provisions in Sweden, for example.
So when it comes to the state of human rights, if you want to give like a report card number from 1 to 10, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst, or Malaysia would sit on which category or which ranking?
I would say just below average. So I would say at least 6 or 7.
6 or 7.
6 or 7, 10 being the worst, so 6 or 7. So it's not great, but it's not that bad either.
But has it improved? I mean, just to give credit, has it improved from the era of Mahathir and Badawi?
I would say that the era of Badawi is probably nice. Is probably the best word to describe it. So it's a more acceptable among all. But I think the current Prime Minister, the unfortunate thing is the sedition crackdown, as you would know very well. Over the last 2 years, we have had record numbers of sedition, investigation, charges, and also conviction. So it's a very serious thing because sedition, as you know, it's no longer relevant. It's archaic. It's hangover from the British Empire, and it's so widely drafted that anything and everything can be seditious. So, so in that sense, it's it's quite bad now. Even though there were some very positive changes during Najib's administration.
I'm just curious to know. I mean, just to put things in perspective, with the slew of arrests coming out of the Sedition Act, are they? I mean, the reason for it to happen, is it because the act? I mean, is it because of Najib's weak administration or Najib's direct focus on wanting to put more pressure towards those who are against him, or is it because of the increased power of little Napoleons within Najib's administration? Because you don't see that much of the usage of Sedition Act during Badawi's time.
Yes.
I mean, although it's there, right?
Yes. Well, I can't. I don't know him personally. I mean, although he seems like a nice fellow.
You can have a cup of tea with him.
But at the end of the day, we only can judge a person by his conduct. So, and he is the number one leader in Malaysia, and at the end of the day, he is responsible. And so, if there are, all this misuse of the Sedition Act to target opposition, dissidents, anything. I mean, we have seen Professor Azmi Sharom be charged for just a mere legal opinion. We have seen Ray, a lawyer and also state assemblyman in Penang, charged for merely saying UMNO celaka. In the Dewan Undangan Negeri, which is supposed to be in a place where you can say anything. You get and Surendran has been charged for merely defending his client, repeating what he has said in court, outside of court. 2 charges.
Wow.
So, and you have Teresa Kop, who was charged for merely making a bad parody video. I mean, if there's any crime, it's because it's not funny. But that's not a crime, So, so at the end of the day, you can't say that, maybe there's pressure, there's no pressure, but you are the Prime Minister and you are ultimately responsible.
But do you think the slew of human rights violation is because of the weakness of the leadership? of the Prime Minister?
Yes. I mean, weakness, yes, and maybe he does want to use it. So we don't know. I mean, I can't read his mind. So I need to judge him by his actions. So.
For Sedition Act, right? Do you think Sedition Act should be replaced with the Harmony Act, for example, or should it be totally scraped off, meaning that we shouldn't even have any act to limit the freedom of expression? I
think it's a double-edged question because there's no such thing as absolute freedom of speech, and I find it very annoying when a lot of government officials and leaders say, "Oh, you cannot have absolute freedom. No country has absolute." No one is saying that, and everyone accepts it. Even the United States or European countries accept that there's no absolute freedom of speech. You can't make racist hate speech. You can't incite violence. So no one is saying that in Malaysia. So what we want is freedom of speech as stated in the Constitution, which is, this is not something, an American Western agenda. This was actually stated in our Constitution at the formation of Malaya. So and of course the Sedition Act, we all know it's a remnant from the British Empire. Being used to protect the Queen or King in those days, and of course to protect our colonial masters. What our previous government should have done upon independence was to actually repeal it. But I think it is probably understandable in the early days of our administration, where it's a new country, it's a young country, so things were not so settled. And
they have the communist insurgency at that time.
Yes,
as a threat.
Correct. That could be a good reason too. And I think sedition maybe in those days might still be acceptable. But after how many since independence from 1957, so it's high time that such a very archaic idea of sedition is thrown in the dustbin. I mean, I would advise you to just take a look at the Sedition Act itself. I mean, the language that's being used is very, very old-fashioned, causing disaffection, to the government.
And they use the word seditious tendency.
Yes, exactly. So it means that
it can mean anything.
The threshold is very low. So it means that it doesn't need to be seditious. It just has seditious tendencies. So I mean, what are tendencies? I mean, causing disaffection. What is disaffection? I mean, you want affection? Go and get a cat. Get a cat or a puppy.
But according to our Prime Minister, it seems we are not ready yet for him to scrape off the Sedition Act. And then there was a whole trending topic on Salah Rakyat going on Twitter. Do you think it goes back to us as well, or can we actually do without the Sedition Act?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the Malaysian government must learn to adapt with the times. I think for a long time, the idea is, government knows best, and they have to control information. The press is controlled. But nowadays, the last 10, 15 years, internet, social media, they are grappling with the idea that people have an outlet to say something. So they have to adapt and look at how progressive nations deal with such things. Okay, so for example, in England, you have people who have been charged for trolling, threatening people with rape and on Twitter and Facebook. So why can't they do that? So instead of saying that because we can't control Twitter and Facebook, so we're just going to hold on to the Sedition Act. No, you actually target individuals who misuse Twitter, Facebook for something very hateful, something that's very aggressive, it incites crime and so forth. And then
not when a kid just click a like on a Israel page.
Exactly. So I think the government must adapt to modern times.
There's also a tendency for government to use religion to justify why human rights is not entirely human rights. I think Najib was famously saying that human rights is not compatible with Islam. But do you agree with that? I mean, perhaps you have a different point of view.
Well, that's part of the problem with Najib is that he say different things in different forums. So at the UN General Assembly, he would say that Malaysia is a moderate country. We respect this and respect that, and maybe on the part of moderation and so forth. And then he gets applauded, in New York, in the UN. Then he comes back at the Muzakara Al-Quran, Al-Quran, and then he says the other opposite, that liberalism, humanism, and so forth. These are values that threaten Islam and the nation. And I think there's enough scholars to say that all these issues of human rights, humanism, fair trial, and so forth, all these issues are perfectly consistent with human rights. It's just that in Malaysia currently, there's a different narrative that is being pushed forward very, very strongly by groups like ISMA, Perkasa, and of course Jakim.
Very right wing. So
very right wing Malay, yes.
Far right wing.
Yes, far right wing Malay rights, Islamic rights, whereby they are trying to say that only their issues matter, and I think it's gaining a bit of traction in Malaysia. But I think a lot of ordinary Malaysians and also civil society leaders are trying to change that one-track narrative and say that this is not Malaysia. So the real Malaysia, is able to cater for everyone, whether somebody is in the middle, on the far right, or on the left, and we respect different views and etc.
I'm just curious to know, because we all know during Mahathir's time, no one dared to even open up their mouth on anything, and the infamous Operasi Lalang is one example where the state actually can control society in a very brutal way. But don't you think things has become better since Badawi and now Najib?
Well, I mean,
when it comes to freedom,
of course you compare with the worst, then it is better. So, but you can't say that it's for a battered spouse. My husband used to beat me, how X number of time per year, and now he only beats me, once or twice a week. So therefore, it's better. So, but I think a lot of the changes it is also not due to the kindness of the government. It's just that they have no choice but to do so. So, and I think one of the great equalizer is the internet. So the internet and social media, so they can no longer hold on to information, and I think the fear factor is getting lesser. So, and I think that the older generation, there's more younger people who's not so frightened by the idea of May 13, not so frightened by ISA or Operation Lalang, and they are more exposed to different ideas.
So are you saying the problem that we are having now is the gap between the older generation and the younger generation on how they see society should function? Because if you look at the bigger picture, do you think that the younger generation of Barisan Nasional and the opposition may have the same view on how freedom should be handled?
Well, I wouldn't give so much credit to the Barisan Nasional younger generation, because if you are, then you wouldn't be joining Barisan Nasional, because to join a party based on race, it's a bit absurd, and whoever that does that should rethink their morality. So for youths of others, yes, I would have much more faith in them, because they are no longer shackled by the idea that they are a first generation after Merdeka. And that they are much more open to a globalized world.
Talking about the younger generation, I think the most famous issue right now, or infamous issue right now, is the issue of Ali Abdul Jalil and Alvin Tan having their passport being revoked, and now they are living in other countries as refugees. Why this is happening? And this is unheard of, I guess, if it ever happened before. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's actually quite a shameful thing. So what we have here is two young persons who have their own very strong point of view. You might not share with their point of view. At the end of the day, it's just Facebook postings. It is Twitter postings. So what? I mean, what is the big deal? I mean, it's the internet, social media is such a huge, vast space. Why do you get provoked or react to such a small matter? And the way that they have been arrested, charged, for a fact that, and I say this from experience, that and of course the Sedition Act, as you know, is very difficult to shake off once you've been charged, because the threshold is very low. You would be generally be convicted. The way, especially for Ali Abdul Jalil, he has been multiply arrested and charged and brought to Johor. You know that he wouldn't be able to get a fair trial, and basically this is a persecution on their freedom of speech. So I would think that they had no choice but to flee the country. So like many refugees fleeing from Myanmar to Malaysia. So we have 2 refugees from Malaysia fleeing to Sweden and the US.
But don't you think like the kind of issues that they raise in social media, for example, Ali Abdul Jalil has been quite vocal against the monarchy and Alvin Teh against religion. But don't you think these are very sensitive topic that even those who might not agree with Sedition Act might say that what they do is wrong, they should be, face some music,
Well, as I said, when it comes to freedom of speech particularly, no one is advocating for absolute freedom, but the threshold before that is breached should be high. So we must be able to accept some people saying very disagreeable things, including people like Ibrahim Ali and Ridwan T, and I wouldn't want them to be charged for sedition. But of course, if they were to say things which is incite hate crimes, incite violence, and I say this it must be quite, the proximity must be quite close, in the sense that it's not just a general speech that for example, I dislike religion, etc., etc., which is anyone has a right to say it. You don't have to believe in God. But if you say, for example, that I dislike religion and I want this specific church to be burned down, or this specific mosque to be burned down, and I have plans to do so, or something to that effect. Let's go and burn down this.
Then it's a real threat.
Then it's a real threat. And I think the authorities should actually call him down for questioning, and just find out whether this is a joke, is serious, whether this is a repeat offender, or whether this is one like a kid who is just having fun. So I think it makes a big difference between an unknown someone, Mr. X or Boy X from so and so from Tanjung Malay, and for example Ibrahim Ali. So if somebody who is well known says such things, the impact and effect would be different than somebody who's unknown with very limited numbers of followers. So I think all these factors are currently not taken into account when they are dealing with such matters. So they would misuse the so-called sensitivity of certain topics, and they try to create a siege mentality that Islam and Malay rights are under threat, when it's not true. But on the other hand, you get someone like Ibrahim Ali, who can say whatever he wants. He has absolute impunity and he gets away with it.
But Ismail leader also got some charges on him, right?
Yes. The Ismail leader has got.
So it's kind of balanced out.
Not really. I think the one on the other side is much larger. I mean, there's like at least more than 20 sedition charges. But in fact, I would say this here, that if the Ismail leader too shouldn't be charged. I mean, if you want to say that non-Malaysia pendatang, yes, it's a historical fact. I mean, we are pendatang. And
but the right question that I should ask right now, if let's say everyone should be given the freedom to voice up their view, either you agree or not, that's another thing. But are Malaysians ready to accept that reality, that people might say something that you completely don't agree, but since the person is not harmful enough to harm you, it's okay to let the person say whatever he or she wants to? Well,
I think we have no choice but to have to agree that this is, Malaysia is ready, because as I said, like it or not, the way information is being shared is no longer like 20 years ago, where there's only mainstream media and the printed press, or RTM or TV3. So now anyone with access to technology has an outlet to say something. And I think that Malaysia as a country has no choice but to accept it, that there are people with different views, and you cannot control people from saying what they want to say. And so unless you want to end up like North Korea, I mean.
But why do you think we're not there yet?
I think we are there, but it's just that the government is not there, and you get all these pressure groups are not there, because it is in their interest, Perkasa and Isma, for the discussion to be closed down. So that no one questions the issue of Islam, Malay rights, the NEP, education, and so forth, which is wrong. These are major policy issues in the country, and anyone, any public policy issues should be up for discussion.
Yeah, that's true. We'll take a short break. When we return, Eric Paulsen will share more about his thoughts on human rights. ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons. Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And we are returning back with Eric Paulsen, Executive Director of Lawyers for Liberty. So I want to start off my question with you on the issue of refugees in Malaysia. Some people even claim that Malaysia is probably the largest country that house refugees in an urban area. So I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but we definitely have an urgent issue when it comes to dealing with refugees coming by boats to Malaysia, and no one is dealing it directly. Why Malaysia is not taking this issue urgently, even though ASEAN Economic Community and ASEAN integration is just around the corner?
Well, partly because Malaysia is not really looking at it so seriously, because there's this wrong perception that if Malaysia were to treat refugees better, then more refugees would come. I think that's a bit short-sighted, because like it or not, refugees are here and they are continuously coming. As long as wherever that refugees are coming from, they are fleeing from persecution. So as long as situation in Myanmar, for example, is not resolved. So Rohingyas, for example, they are still being persecuted and discriminated. In fact, it's very serious. There's actually a slow genocide going on in the Rakhine state. So the Rohingyas have no choice but to come to Malaysia, no matter what measures Malaysia take, because it's still better than dying in Myanmar.
Mm-hmm. But this is not the first time we have huge problem of refugees. Even back in the 60s, I think, if I'm not mistaken, historically, the issue of Cambodians fleeing to Malaysia at that time. Also, we didn't deal with it successfully in a way that we actually recognize their status and all that. But why Malaysia has gone 10 steps backwards when it comes to human rights of people who are very vulnerable?
I think there was in the 70s. I think the Vietnam War. So I think we received quite a number of Vietnamese refugees, and I think that there's not that much research in that era. But I from what I understand is there were some problems, but by and large, generally, Malaysia handled them, and it wasn't such a big issue at that time. The fact that the refugees have been arriving since the 1990s from Myanmar especially. So it's been more than 20 years, 30 years. I'm also equally surprised as you as to why the government are not really having a clear-cut policy when it comes to dealing with refugees. Because we all know that when it comes to dealing with refugees, things are still very ad hoc. The policy they have this month can change next month. Whether in terms of detention of women, detention of children, whether their UNHCR cards can be recognized or not. So it's quite at a very ad hoc level, and sometimes it really depends on individual police officer, individual rela, or individual immigration rate. So which is quite unfortunate, because Malaysia is supposed to be a modern state. We are not supposed to be like a tin pot country.
Mm-hmm. For those refugees that got their UNHCR card, they can't even work. So how they even survive to fend for their daily lives? Why the government are not looking into this issue as a human issue, not so much on whether they are refugee or not?
Well, that is in fact actually very, very surprising, because you know that Malaysia relies a lot on migrant workers, foreign migrant workers. We have a few million. So the idea that we have this 150,000 refugees or so, why don't you just allow them to work while they're still in the country? Because we all know
and
they are not
for their
go
kids
anywhere.
to be educated.
Exactly. So I think the Malaysian government have to come to a realization that they are here to stay. and that while they are here for the next few years or 10 years or so, they need to be sheltered, they need to be clothed, they need to work to survive. Their kids needs to go to school, they need to be documented. So these are very, very basic functions that all states in the world should provide to refugees. But the Malaysian government is not doing it because, as I said, there's this misconception that if they treat them better, more will come.
But their fear is not something that is really. I mean, even though you say it's a misconception, but their fear is actually quite real. I mean, it's not just from our neighboring countries where the refugee comes from, but also from Middle East and all the way from China as well. So it's something that the government of Malaysia realized that if we recognize them, that means that refugees from all over the world might come to Malaysia, either as a channel to go to other countries or just to stay put there as long as they can.
Well, I mean, as long as there's conflict in the world, as long as individuals are being, or groups of people are being persecuted, then they are, people would flee. I mean, if you are being, as just because you are a Rohingya and then you can't, you're slowly being killed, you have no choice but to flee. So whether you flee to Malaysia or flee to Australia or you flee to the US, it's up to the individual. So, so I don't think we can blame. Put the blame on the refugees. So as long as there's persecution in China, there's persecution in Sri Lanka, for example, persecution in Myanmar, then I think Malaysia, like all other nations in the world, have a responsibility to accept them, to try to make their life livable, and don't go out of your way to make them miserable. I'm not saying you should give them VIP treatment. Treat them like normal human beings, but don't make their lives miserable.
But this is not so much of a Malaysia phenomena as well. It seems like it's a regional phenomena because even Australia is starting to treat refugees as if they are illegal immigrants.
Yes, I mean, Australia is a different topic, but in fact, we are all very surprised at how Australia is treating refugees, and their actions have been heavily condemned. This is not how a first world should be treating their refugees. So, Australia certainly is not the model. So we should look at Central European countries, the Scandinavian, Germany, even the US. US has pretty good refugee policies. So, but I mean, of course, you should also try to look at some of the countries which you might not normally think treat refugees well. But I wouldn't say well, but they have been hosting quite a number of refugees from Syria, Jordan, for example, Lebanon, and Pakistan. They have much more refugees. We are talking about in the millions, because they are very close to the conflict area. So, so compared to Malaysia, which is still within 150,000, is not that many. And like I said, they're already here, and Malaysia needs migrant workers. So, just accept them.
Glad that you mentioned about migrant workers. Migrants, the state of migrant workers in Malaysia, are they in a better status compared to probably a decade ago? Or actually, there's no changes in terms of their rights, their welfare, and also the kind of payment that they are getting?
I think it's in fact getting worse. Because in all the reports in 2014 or recent reports, we have fallen, to the category of like among the worst abusers of migrant workers in the world. And we all know that migrant workers, they are exploited constantly. They don't have their passport with them, and they are prone to exploitation. They get harassed, they get extorted. But of course there are some migrant workers who have direct employment with a particular company, which is the way to go. But bringing in migrant workers is a big business in Malaysia. It's actually a business.
So human trafficking is also one of the worst offenders for Malaysia.
Correct. And so what happens is you get all these agents going to poor countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and so forth, and they promise them the world, and they sign whatever contracts, and they pay a lot of money to come to Malaysia, maybe up to 10,000 ringgit, whereby these migrant workers have to sell their land, they have to take loans, with the understanding that they will be getting permanent jobs, and with the proper employment and X number of hours per month. But a lot of them, they get cheated because they come here, they get stranded at the airports, they get stranded without a job, and then they find out that they don't have proper employment, and then they're sort of like being moved around to work in this company for a week, 2 weeks, and then they move around to another company and so forth. So so Malaysia must actually crack down on the business of bringing in migrant workers, because this is really not.
But is it because of we already have a very poor labour law? I mean, even for Malaysian citizens, their protection in terms of labour is also not as strong as other countries.
Yes, I agree with it. I agree with that, because for a long time, even to form unions is very, very difficult. It is still difficult now. So Malaysia's government generally do not respect the rights of the workers. Yes, I would agree that it follows that by and large we have a poor understanding and poor policies when it comes to workers' rights in general, and by extension, because you're a migrant worker, then you are seen to be, that you are open to exploitation and is acceptable.
And Malaysians are generally crazy with cheap labor. Our economic development is based on cheap labor, like it or not. But so it seems like Malaysia is moving towards this dual image where we want to have this moderate Islamic image country, but at the same time, behind closed door, we are offenders, the worst kind of offenders when it comes to migrant workers, refugees, human trafficking, and also when it comes to prostitution, we are also one of the worst.
Yes, I mean, a lot of our so-called Islamic image is just, these are mere images. I mean, big mosques, big events, Islamic events, Sharia index. I mean, what is a Sharia index that they are coming up with? All these are just mere veneers. But in terms of substance, I think you would see that there's a lot of underneath. There's a lot of things that are incompatible with how Islam should be practiced. But it's not surprising. You get a lot of countries in the Middle East. These are the worst offenders of human rights, and they are also seen to be the face of Islam. So Islam is a political tool to lull the Muslims into thinking that our government is Islamic and therefore they must be good people, they must be good governance, when that's far from the truth.
Yeah, it's totally far from the truth, because when you talk about sex industry, you would think about Thailand, but actually Malaysia is in the top 10 or top 5 of the biggest sex industry in the world, and it seems like the rights of these vulnerable workers are not being protected. But why there's very little political will to correct the kind of problems that we have in our backyard?
I mean, I would think that there are business interests. I mean, I'm not a researcher in this area, but I would think that a lot of illegal activities, trafficking, entertainment business, and prostitution, they have links to people of a certain character, and because of that, there is a lack of will to actually shut down such activities. So at the end of the day, it's political will, and I think the government must actually make a very serious decision. Is this, as a matter of policy, do we want such activities in Malaysia? So if not, then you have to act upon it.
Yeah, you definitely have to act upon it. But the most ironic part is Malaysia is actually part of the UN Human Rights Council. I think they just ended their term. But do you think they deserve to be on that seat in the first place?
Well, the UN is a huge organization. It's the only it's the UN, United Nations. So a lot of this council, they go by way of areas. So Malaysia would represent Asia Pacific, and then there's African states would represent Africa and Europe. So countries that sit on the UN Human Rights Council are not necessarily pro-human rights. They sit there because it is their time, or it's their turn, or that there's no one else better, or that due to consensus lobbying, then they sit.
So
on.
It's merely a political organization. That means.
In a way, yes, it is definitely a political organization, but it's a political organization that is trying to push certain issues, and the UN Human Rights Council is trying to push the issue of human rights. So and the groups that sit on the UN Human Rights Council, some people are for human rights, some people are not for human rights, but nonetheless they are sitting in that council.
So while Malaysia were there, what did we do?
Well, no, Malaysia would be just part of this bigger council, and then they would be discussing topics from whatever periodic topics that comes up with, so they would be culpable or not culpable with the rest of the council. So I don't think you can single out Malaysia, but just that you might want to say that Malaysia, because they are sitting on the Human Rights Council, they should be able to do better than what they've been doing.
And Malaysia will be joining the the UN, United Nations Security Council. What do you foresee? I mean, if there's anything beneficial for Malaysia to be part of this?
Well, the UN Security Council is definitely a very important council, because it would deliberate on issues of grave importance in terms of whether there's intervention when it comes to or at least to condemn certain actions in the world. So it has to do with security, peace, and whether to condemn certain acts of war.
And Malaysian is generally quite passionate when it comes to Middle Eastern issue, especially Palestine.
Yes, I would hope so. I mean, I would hope that Malaysia would take up a very much stronger position when it comes to certain issues that's affecting around the world, particularly Palestine, for example. But also, I think Myanmar, because Malaysia is also part of ASEAN, and I think they'll be taking the chair next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So since Malaysia are in the position to probably not show leadership, but actually to be part of the leadership in the world, in ASEAN and also in the UN Security Council. So I would certainly hope that Malaysia take a much stronger position, but it has to be a consistent position. And then whatever that Malaysia does in the international arena must also be reflected in Malaysia. So you cannot have a progressive vision overseas, but then you have a very regressive.
But that's what's happening right now, isn't it?
Exactly. So to avoid being accused, of being hypocritical, to be double standards and so forth, Malaysia, if they want to be respected internationally, that so that when whatever that they say has a very strong moral imperative, then I think Malaysia also must slowly improve their human rights standing within the country. So, for example, I can say that. So when some countries in the European countries, for example, Sweden or Finland, when they say something about, for example, on education, on death penalty, for example, on refugees, it is respected, because we know that they practice what they preach.
They walk the talk.
Yes. So Malaysia. So likewise, if they want, whatever that they say in the international arena to be respected, then they have to actually practice what they say in Malaysia and also international. So the example I can give is Myanmar, for example. So if Malaysia were to condemn how the Rohingyas are being treated in Myanmar, so why can't they treat refugees in Malaysia while they're here? So that would be walking the talk.
Before we end the show, I want to ask you, a lot of people are starting to realize that Indonesia could be like the best example of how human rights can be pushed to the extent where it should be. Indonesian government have been working very closely with the civil society to address a range of human rights issue there. Of course, they have a lot of really tiring and really huge human rights issue when it comes to the large community within all the different regions in the country. Do you think Malaysia can learn something out of it from Indonesia, especially with the new President Joko Widodo?
I hope so. Because I think Indonesia, they are able to. They seem to be able to move quicker and faster. It's because unlike Malaysia, they only have they have changes of government all the time, which is actually a good thing. Whether a good government or bad government, that's a separate issue. But the idea that there must be a difference governance, that itself is a good thing. And I think in Indonesia too, they have a free press. So whatever issues that they were to bring up. So for example, if they were to have a major policy change, if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere that they are going to amend, they're going to withdraw the Islamic and moral studies.
Oh yeah, we actually reported that at during ASEAN. They want to focus more on science advancement, so the education will be more geared towards science and technology rather than religion and morality.
Correct. So that is an excellent move on the part, because science and technology is what you should be studying in school, not morality and religion. So can you imagine that conversation take place in Malaysia? If somebody were to suggest, a minister or somebody were to suggest that, we should take religious studies and morality out of our school, can you imagine the baying of blood by Perkasa and Isma and Jakim and Derhaka, Biadab, Kurang Ajar and so forth. So that conversation in Malaysia is not being allowed to happen. So which is different because Indonesia has got a free press.
So I guess we are moving 10 steps backwards while Indonesia is slowly pacing forward. Thank you very much for sharing your view with us. It's a pleasure, and of course, happy Human Rights Day. Hopefully that we can push forward human rights in Malaysia especially. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.